Okay, welcome back for Community Resilience. We are balls deep in the first chapter of my thesis. I'm reading it. So this segment is all about the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And this is probably the longest part because this is the hill I will die on. If this interests you, go check out the Diagnosing and Dismantling Society playlist, where we kind of go into different parts within the DSM. Here we go. Also, I'm a single mom and my kid is around, so we might get interrupted. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, also known as the DSM. Okay. In 1952, the American Psychiatric Association (APA) has published 8 editions of. Since 1952, the American Psychiatric Association has published 8 editions of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Every edition has increased diagnostic coding with an explicit concentration of behavior, not the internal study of the brain. The pathologizing of mental illness has served as an excuse for the state to move and control bodies. French philosopher and social theorist Michel Foucault exposes these practices of pathology in his book Madness and Civilization. He writes, "The morbid entity was not defined from observed signs nor from the supposed causes, but somewhere between and beyond both. It was perceived as a certain qualitative coherence, which had its own laws of transmission, of development, and of transformation. It is the secret logic of this quality that controls the development of the idea of melancholy, not medical theory." Confirming Foucault's theory is the DSM-1, which states mental deficiency is a legal term, comparable to the term insanity. It has little meaning in clinical psychiatry. The first edition of the DSM was published in 1952, providing language and characteristics to 112 mental disorders. Per the first edition, this revision of psychiatric nomenclature is a word for wording, like specific words to achieve a goal, okay? This revision of psychiatric nomenclature attempts to provide a classification system consistent with the concepts of modern psychology and neurology, and it goes on to proclaim, "This nomenclature limits itself to the classification of the disturbances of mental functioning. It does not include neurological diagnoses or diagnoses of intracranial pathology per se." The American Psychiatric Association explains classifications such as psychotic, neurotic, or behavioral reactions are not necessarily related in severity to the degree of organic brain syndrome and are as much determined by inherent personality patterns. Excuse me, no. The social setting and the stresses of interpersonal relations, thus reinforcing the power of language used to control. The second edition of the DSM, published in 1968, a major moment in revolutionary thought throughout the world, was complete with 145 mental disorders. According to Ernest M. Grunberg, MD, Doctor, and PH, the chairman of the Committee on Nomenclature and Statistics for the APA, the second edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM-2, reflects the growth of the concept that the people of all nations live in one world. Written in partnership with the World Health Organization, the DSM-2 adopted the International Classification of Diseases, the ICD, which is medical coding. So like when you go to the doctor, they have like an ICD code. It's like a 5-number code that they use within their medical notes. And incorporated psychiatry. The rapid integration of psychiatry with the rest of medicine also helped create a need to have psychiatric nomenclature and classifications closely integrated with those of other medical practitioners. Grudenberg also writes, "In preparing this manual, the committee had to make adjustments within a few of the ICD categories to make them conform better to U.S. usage. Decisions were also made regarding certain diagnoses which have not been generally accepted in U.S. psychiatry. Some of those diagnoses have been omitted here. Others have been included and qualified as controversial. Acknowledging discrepancies and limitations, Grunberg continues, no list, so this is written in the DSM-2. I was doing a lot of this research at the LA Public Library using the actual DSMs, okay? This is verbatim from those books. No list of diagnostic terms could be completely adequate for use in all of those situations and in every country for all time. Why? Because they're not doing it from brain. They're doing it based on behavior and municipal codes, right? Certain laws. Nor can it incorporate all of the accumulated new knowledge of psychiatry at one point in time. Again, this was written in the early or mid 1960s because it was published in 68. The committee has attempted to put down what it judges to be generally agreed upon by well-informed psychiatrists today. So they do this like democratic process in which certain people voted on certain behaviors equaling certain disorders, okay? However, this statement does not limit the use, this is me writing. However, the statement does not limit the use of the DSM, admittedly states it will also be used in consultations to courts and industrial health services, further supporting claims made by Foucault. I'm going to stop for a minute and just share quick. So 1968 was like primetime civil rights, right? So the DSM-2, if you go and look at it, it has stuff like about wanting justice and shit like that. And like even autism now has like, you know, justice being a symptom of, you know, social justice. All this to say is that my thesis, my actual like thesis, my idea, my hypothesis that I proved within this writing and research was that these are not used for helping people, but used to keep people controlled, right? Okay? Now, if we're talking about the DSM-2 right now, we're all talking about all the DSMs, but what we already talked about in the first part of this chapter was how neoliberalism was created to do just this, right? And that happened in the 80s. So this is setting the stage for neoliberalism, okay? Very important. Alright, the writers of the DSM-2 compiled the draft and circulated it to 120 psychiatrists in February of 1967 with a request for specific suggestions to eliminate errors and to improve the quality of statements indicating the proper usage of terms which the manual describes. That's that democratic process, okay? I told you about. Moreover, the DSM serves as a foundation of the continued growth and processes of the APA codifying and pathologizing unwanted behaviors. The addition of the psychiatric coding in the International Classifications of Diseases, or ICD, constituted the expansion of the ICD as these embellishments served the needs of the U.S. while neglecting the already suitable classification for diseases on an international level. Both the DSM-2 and the ICD-8 went into effect in 1968. When I was doing claims adjusting for Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey, we were using the ICD-9, and while I was in that job, this was 2010-ish. 2010 to like 2014. They changed the ICD-9 to the ICD-10. Okay, so this is again like World Health. This is global coding. All right. Both the DSM-2 and ICD-8 went into effect in 1968, continuing the corruption between government policies and medical treatments. How many more pages of this? Oh my god, it's so long. Alright, I'm gonna stop interjecting. I'm gonna try my best. This is like the hill I will die on. This chunk right here. Okay. The 1980 publishing of the DSM-3 included 265 mental disorders paired with the ICD-9, the new and improved international diagnostic coding for clinicians. Politically, 1980 was the year Ronald Reagan took office as the President of the United States and immediately introduced and implemented conservative socioeconomic policies to revitalize its economy. Harvey explains that Reagan's agenda was to curb the power of labor, deregulate industry, agriculture, and resource extraction, and liberate the powers of finance both internally and on a world stage. Liberate the powers of finance. Okay. These policies resulted in mass deinstitutionalization of mental health facilities, cutting federal funding for mental health services, and placing sole responsibility of those suffering with mental illness to local entities across the nation. The increase of diagnostic categories in the DSM paired with the cuts in federal funding for mental health services illustrates the rise of corporate and government power. The DSM serves as a tool used by clinicians, law enforcement, corporate powers, and government to normalize behavior. The normalization of the power of normalization is the foundation of the genocide being carried out against the homeless and mentally ill. Foucault warns the vast mechanism established to a slow, continuous, imputable gradation that made it possible to pass naturally from disorder to offense and back from a transgression of the law to a slight departure from a rule, an average, a demand, a norm. The DSM explicitly states when the disturbance is limited to a conflict between an individual and society, this may represent social deviance, which may or may not be commendable, but is not by itself a mental disorder. However, the purpose of the DSM-3 is to provide clear descriptions of the diagnostic categories in order to enable clinicians and investigators to diagnose, communicate about, study, and treat various mental disorders. Mental disorders serves as a scapegoat to the undesirable behavior. Author, scholar, and critic of the United States psychiatric system, Thomas Zaz, explains the current mental health model in his book, Liberation by Oppression, a comparative study of slavery in psychiatry. Modern psychiatry rests on the false premise that mental illnesses are brain diseases treatable with drugs. Furthermore, the criminal justice system, public health system, and psychiatry, protecting the public from lawlessness, certain contagious diseases and toxins, and dangerous mental patients are considered to belong in the public sphere. These functions are performed coercively by agents of the state imposing their services on individuals for the benefit of the community, right? So, like, I hope you guys are understanding. So, like, yeah, anyway. The DSM serves as a tool to ensure the movement of bodies that threaten the growth of different agencies supporting the state apparatus. Foucault explains this relationship by writing, between the latest institution of rehabilitation, where one is taken in order to avoid prison, and the prison where one is sent after defiable offense, the difference is, and must be, scarcely perceptible, meaning there's no difference, except length of stay. One kind of talks about rehabilitation, the other is about punishment, right? But they're the same. I've been through jail and through mental institutions, personally. The public perception for the movement and control of bodies is forgiven, even encouraged, when the language to describe the homeless and mentally ill instills fear. The use of vague terms for creating the consent of the U.S. population is one strategy employed by political leaders. Evidence suggests politicians, clinicians, law enforcement, and service providers collaborate on the DSM and implement its nomenclature because of the power of language, and language like terrorism targets civilians and generates fear in order to affect political change. We are living balls deep in this right now. Since the publishing of the DSM-3, there have been 4 more editions published, and the most recent was the 2013 publishing of the DSM-5. The publishing of the DSM-5 added 15 new diagnostic categories, including disruptive impulse control and conduct disorders, which we've kind of already talked about in the Dismantling and Diagnosing Society segment, in which disorders are all characterized by problems in emotional and behavior self-control. In the classical period, despite a certain common reference to offense in general, the order of the crime, the order of the sin, and the order of the bad conduct remained separate insofar that they related to separate criteria and authorities: court, penance, and confinement. And that is from Foucault. This category sets the path for first responders, law enforcement, to diagnose a person with mental illness based on their behaviors and or resistance to arrest upon interaction with police. The criteria for oppositional defiant disorder is now grouped into 3 types: angry, irritable mood, argumentative, defiant behavior, and vindictiveness. The use of the DSM has surpassed its initial ambition, as it is now a tool used to punish. Foucault explains the harmfulness of power and punishment by saying, the power to punish is not essentially different from that of curing or educating. Ulterior motives must be exposed and investigated when mental illness is the only type of illness validated by the White House. That is from SAS, the Liberation from Oppression. This collusion between the government and pharmaceutical companies, doctors and insurance companies weaves into the social, political, and economic fabric of this country. A comprehensive understanding of the relationship between the entities exceeds the scope of this work, but being able to identify this relationship is imperative to the foundational understanding of the systemic control and influence of capitalism on the physical and mental well-being of the people of this nation and this world. In addition to this section of the DSM has paved way for more policing, surveillance, not limited to doctors and law enforcement, but now includes neighbors, friends, family, co-workers, and random bystanders. This is what we are really experiencing right now with this administration. This is a quote from Foucault. The judges of normality are present everywhere. We are in a society of the teacher judge, the doctor judges, the educator judge, the social worker judge. It is on them that the universal reign of the normative is based, and each individual, wherever he may find himself, subjects to it his body, his gestures, his behavior, his aptitudes, and achievements. This is why I stay home. The bottom line is that the expansion of these categories still does not reflect the root problem. These behaviors are being listed in order to identify a person as an individual who has a mental disability, thus erasing their experience and not addressing the problem that is making the person act or react in the first place. That's me. The expansion, not me, that's my writing. The expansion of the behavioral pathology of the current DSM makes it nearly impossible for diagnosed individuals to escape the dreaded grasp of the current mental health model, complete with medication and unwanted or unwilling treatment options. Been through this. There is another step in almost every 2-century effort to regulate the behavior of societies unmanageable, creating pathologies to regulate behavior by using the DSM to misdiagnose and mistreat individuals for mental disorder and gain consent when labeling and normalized behavior. We must ask ourselves, how were people made to accept the power to punish, or quite simply, when punished, tolerate being so? The systemic use of pathology ensures the dichotomy of one within themselves and their greater environment. By examining the past 60 years of the corrupt mental health model in the United States, it becomes abundantly clear that as the DSM expands, so do treatment options in the form of pharmaceuticals. Medication has been developed, introduced, and sold to consumers with mental health issues. This is another means of controlling of the masses by using diagnoses to prescribe medication to alter brain activity and change undesirable behaviors. I'm going to insert a little bit here to remain useful to capitalism. This neglects the context in which these mental health issues are discovered, such as the criminalization of homelessness. Next part of the chapter is going to be Big Pharma and prison industry. I'm going to end this section here, and I will be back when I'm back for Big Pharma and prison industry. Have a good one.